The Dominion had never known defeat. In 17 star systems across hundreds of worlds, no species had ever stopped their advance. Their warships moved through the galaxy like a dark wave, swallowing everything in their path. Civilizations that had existed for thousands of years fell within days. Armies that numbered in the millions surrendered without firing a single shot. The way was simple and brutal. They did not negotiate, they did not compromise, they simply took what they wanted. High Commander stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Silence of Worlds. He was tall even by standards, his pale skin stretched tight over a thin frame. His eyes, black and cold like deep space itself, watched the stars pass by on the main viewing screen. Behind him, dozens of officers worked at their stations, monitoring the fleet's progress toward their next target. "Report," said, his voice flat and emotionless. His tactical advisor, a younger named, stepped forward with a data tablet. "We have completed the conquest of the system, High Commander. All resistance has been eliminated. The population has been processed and assigned to labor camps. Resource extraction will begin within the cycle." Did not react. This was simply how things were done. There had been a peaceful species, artists and philosophers who had never developed weapons of war. They had tried to reason with the Dominion to offer friendship and cultural exchange, had found their attempts amusing. In the end, they had fallen like all the others. "What is our next target?" asked. Pulled up a star chart on the main screen. A small yellow star appeared, circled by several planets. "The Sol system, High Commander. It lies directly in our expansion path. There is one inhabited world, the third planet from the star. The natives call it Earth." "What do we know about them?" "Very little. They are a young species, barely 200 years into faster-than-light travel. Carbon-based life forms, roughly similar to us in basic biology. They call themselves humans." Paused, checking his data. "They have a small military fleet, perhaps 200 vessels. Nothing that could threaten us." Turned back to the viewing screen. Another primitive species, another easy conquest. He had done this so many times that it had become routine. The pattern was always the same. The Dominion would arrive, broadcast their demands, and the target species would resist for a short time before realizing the hopelessness of their situation. Then they would surrender, and the Dominion would add another world to its empire. "Set course for Sol," commanded. "We will arrive with the full fleet. I want this conquest completed quickly. We have more important systems to claim." The Silence of Worlds turned toward the distant yellow star, and 300 warships followed in its wake. Each vessel was a masterwork of engineering, sleek, elegant, and deadly. Their weapons could crack planets, their shields could withstand almost any attack, and their neural disruption systems could render entire populations unconscious with a single pulse. No species had ever found a way to resist the neural weapons. It was the Dominion's greatest advantage. Far across the galaxy, on the blue and green world called Earth, Admiral received the first warning of the approaching threat. She was in her office at Terran Defense Coalition headquarters in Seoul when her aide rushed in with the report. The young officer's face was pale with fear. "Admiral, our deep space sensors have detected a massive fleet entering our sector. 300 vessels, all heavily armed. They match the description of warships." Set down the cup of tea she had been drinking and looked at the report. She was 63 years old, with hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that had seen more than most people could imagine. She had spent her entire adult life preparing for a moment like this, a moment when humanity would face a threat from beyond the stars. "How long until they reach Earth?" she asked. 47 hours, Admiral." Nodded slowly. She had read the intelligence reports about the Dominion. She knew what they had done to other species, how they had crushed every civilization in their path. She knew that by all logical analysis, humanity had no chance of surviving this encounter. But also knew something that they did not. She knew what humans were capable of when their backs were against the wall. She stood up and walked to the window of her office. Outside, the city of Seoul stretched to the horizon, millions of people going about their daily lives, unaware that an alien armada was coming to enslave them. Children were walking to school. Workers were heading to their jobs. Families were sharing meals together. All of it would be destroyed if they succeeded. Thought about her own family. Her daughter, her. She thought about the generations of humans who had struggled and suffered and died so that their descendants could reach the stars. She thought about every war humanity had ever fought, every disaster they had survived, every challenge they had overcome. They had conquered many species, but they had never faced anything like humanity. Turned away from the window and pressed the communication button on her desk. This is Admiral to all Terran Defense Coalition commands. Code Red alert. I repeat, Code Red. All military personnel are to report to their stations immediately. All civilian ships are to return to port. This is not a drill. She paused for a moment, then added, and someone get me General on a secure line. It's time to wake up the reserves. Across the world, alarms began to sound. Military bases that had been quiet for years suddenly came to life. Ships that had been in maintenance were rushed back into service. Soldiers who had been on leave kissed their families goodbye and reported for duty. Humanity was about to face its greatest test. The Dominion was coming, confident in their history of easy victories. They expected another quick conquest, another species to add to their collection of slaves. They had no idea what was waiting for them. The advance fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system. 50 warships, each one capable of destroying a small moon, arranged themselves in a perfect attack formation. Their commander, Sub-Admiral, looked at the small blue planet in the distance and felt nothing but contempt. This would be over quickly. Begin standard broadcast, ordered. Inform them of our demands. The message went out across all frequencies. It was the same message the Dominion had sent to hundreds of worlds before. Surrender immediately. Disable all weapons. Prepare for processing. Resistance would result in the complete destruction of their civilization. They had given this speech so many times that it had become boring. They expected fear. They expected panic. They expected desperate pleas for mercy. Instead, they received a single response from the human fleet that was moving to intercept them. This is Fleet Admiral of the Terran Defense Coalition. Your terms are rejected. Turn back now or face the consequences. Stared at the communication screen in disbelief. No species had ever rejected their demands so directly. Most would try to negotiate, to buy time, to beg for better terms. This human female had simply said no, as if she genuinely believed she could stop them. She must be insane, said to his officers. Or perhaps humans are too primitive to understand what they are facing. Activate neural disruption weapons and prepare to engage. The ships moved forward, their weapons charging with deadly energy. The neural disruption system was their greatest weapon. It sent out a pulse that interfered with the brain activity of any living creature, causing immediate unconsciousness. No species had ever developed a defense against it. Within minutes, every human on those ships would be helpless, and their vessels would drift uselessly in space. Captain stood on the bridge of the TDC destroyer Indomitable, watching the enemy fleet approach. He was 42 years old, a career military officer who had never expected to fight in an actual space battle. Around him, his crew worked at their stations with focused determination. They all knew what was at stake. "Captain, the enemy is charging some kind of energy weapon," his sensor officer reported. "It doesn't match anything in our database." "Shields up," ordered. "All hands prepare for contact." The pulse hit the human fleet like an invisible wave. On the enemy ships, officers watched their screens, waiting for the familiar sight of disabled vessels and unconscious crews. What they saw instead made no sense. The human ships kept coming. Their weapons were charging. Their shields were holding. The crews were still active, still fighting. Impossible, whispered. Hit them again, maximum power. Another pulse, stronger than the first, washed over the human fleet. On the Indomitable, Captain felt a sharp pain behind his eyes, like the beginning of a bad headache. Several of his crew members winced and rubbed their temples, but no one fell unconscious. No one stopped working. What was that? His weapons officer asked, shaking her head to clear it. I don't know, replied. But whatever they tried, it didn't work. All ships opened fire. The human fleet unleashed everything it had. Missiles streaked across space. Kinetic rounds traveling at a fraction of the speed of light slammed into shields. Energy beams cut through the darkness. The attack was brutal, relentless, and completely unexpected. They had never fought an enemy who could resist their neural weapons. Their entire military strategy was built around that one advantage. Without it, they were forced to fight a conventional battle against an enemy that had spent its entire history fighting wars. On the Silence of Worlds, far behind the battle lines, High Commander watched the sensor data with growing horror. His advanced fleet was being destroyed. Ship after ship disappeared from the tactical display as human weapons found their targets. The humans fought with a ferocity that they had never encountered. They pressed forward when they should have retreated. They took risks that no logical commander would take, and they simply would not stop. How is this happening? Demanded. The neural weapons should have disabled them. Was frantically searching through databases, trying to find an answer. I don't understand, High Commander. According to our scans, the humans have similar brain structures to other species we have conquered. The weapons should work on them. But the weapons had not worked. And now, 4 hours after the battle had begun, Subadmiral's flagship exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The remaining ships tried to retreat, but the humans pursued them, hunting them down one by one. Not a single ship escaped. On the Indomitable, Captain slumped back in his command chair as the last enemy signal disappeared from his screens. His head was still pounding from the neural pulse, but he was alive. His crew was alive. They had won. Get me a line to Admiral, he said quietly. Tell her the advance fleet has been destroyed. Across the human fleet, similar scenes were playing out. Officers and crew members who had prepared themselves for death were instead celebrating survival. Some were crying. Others were laughing. A few were doing both at the same time. They had done the impossible. They had beaten an enemy that had never been beaten before. Admiral received Captain's report in her command center. She allowed herself a small smile, but she knew that this was only the beginning. The Still had 250 ships, and now they knew that their primary weapon was useless against humans. Get our ships back to defensive positions, she ordered. Recover our wounded and repair what we can. The real fight is coming. She looked at the tactical display, at the distant cluster of red dots that represented the main fleet. Somewhere out there, High Commander was trying to understand what had just happened. He was probably terrified, probably confused, probably desperate. Good thought, let him feel what all his victims felt. Let him know what it's like to face an enemy that won't surrender, that won't break, that will never stop fighting. The Dominion had come to Earth expecting easy prey. They had found something very different. They had found humanity. High Commander had not slept in 2 days. He stood in his private chamber aboard the Silence of Worlds, staring at the reports that his science officers had prepared. The words on the screens made no sense to him. They described something that should not exist, something that violated everything they knew about life in the universe. Earth was a... The classification was an old one, created by the first explorers thousands of years ago. Were planets so hostile, so dangerous, that no intelligent life could possibly evolve there? They were marked on star charts as places to avoid, curiosities to be studied from a distance but never approached. The idea that a spacefaring civilization could emerge from such a world was considered impossible. Yet here were the humans, alive and fighting, having evolved on a planet that should have killed them countless times over. Read the details again, hopping to find something he had missed. Earth had a surface gravity that was crushing by standards. Its atmosphere contained oxygen, a gas so reactive that it could burn through metal. The planet's star bombarded the surface with dangerous radiation every day. The temperature ranged from extreme cold to extreme heat, sometimes in the same location within a single rotation. Earthquakes shook the ground. Volcanoes spewed fire and poison. Storms tore across the surface with enough force to destroy entire cities. And worst of all, Earth's ecosystem was a nightmare of constant violence. Every organism on that world survived by killing and eating other organisms. The plants were toxic. The insects carried diseases. The animals had developed claws, teeth, and venom to murder each other more efficiently. Even the tiny creatures invisible to the naked eye were constantly at war, fighting for survival inside the bodies of larger creatures. The humans had evolved in the middle of all this horror. They had not just survived, they had thrived. They had become the dominant species on their planet by being more violent, more adaptable, and more relentless than everything else. Their neural systems are different from any species we have encountered, Chief Scientist explained, standing nervously before. The constant environmental stress of there has made their brains harder, more resistant. Our neural disruption weapons cause them pain but not unconsciousness. They can function through it. Then find another weapon, demanded. There must be something that can stop them. Shook her head slowly. High Commander, you do not understand. It is not just their resistance to our weapons. Everything about them is designed for combat. Their bodies can continue fighting even when severely damaged. They can heal from injuries that would kill us. They can go without sleep for days when necessary. They feel fear, but they have the ability to ignore it and keep fighting anyway. She pulled up more data on the screen. They are pursuit predators. Their ancestors survived by chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They can run for hours without stopping. They can track an enemy across any terrain in any weather until it is too tired to escape. And they do not give up, ever. Felt something cold settle in his chest. He recognized the feeling. It was fear. He had not experienced it in a very long time. Meanwhile, on Earth, Lieutenant Commander was conducting her own research. She worked in a secure underground facility, surrounded by screens showing intercepted communications. She was 34 years old, small and slight, with short black hair and eyes that noticed everything. Her job was to understand the enemy, and what she was learning made her smile. They were terrified. Their communications were filled with confusion and fear. They did not understand why their weapons had failed. They did not understand how the humans had destroyed their advanced fleet. They were calling Earth a cursed world, calling humans monsters and demons. Some of the younger officers were suggesting retreat, arguing that any species that could survive on such a hellish planet was too dangerous to fight. Compiled her findings and sent them to Admiral. Then she leaned back in her chair and allowed herself a moment of dark satisfaction. For too long, humanity had felt small and vulnerable in the universe. They had looked at the stars and wondered if they were alone, wondered if they could survive in a galaxy full of unknown dangers. They had feared what they might find out there. Now they knew the truth. They were not the weak ones. They were not the prey. They were the product of 4 billion years of brutal natural selection on one of the most hostile planets in the known galaxy. Admiral Red's report in her command center. Around her, officers were coordinating the defense of Earth, tracking the fleet's movements and preparing for the next engagement. The mood was different now than it had been 2 days ago. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with something else: confidence, determination, and a fierce pride. Called a meeting of her senior officers. They gathered in the war room, their faces lit by the glow of tactical displays. Captain was there, still nursing the headache from the neural pulse but refusing to leave his post. General, commander of ground forces, sat with his arms crossed. Rear Admiral, in charge of the reserve fleet, studied the enemy positions with intense focus. They expected us to be easy prey, began. They expected us to fall like every other species they have conquered. They were wrong. Now they are scared, and scared enemies make mistakes. She brought up a map of the Sol system, showing the positions of both fleets. They still have numbers on their side. 250 ships against our 170. But numbers are not everything. We have something they don't. We have 4 billion years of evolution telling us never to surrender, never to give up, never to stop fighting. She looked at each of her officers in turn. They came here to conquer us. I say we show them what happens when you threaten a species. I say we take this fight to them. General grinned, a fierce expression that showed too many teeth. What did you have in mind, Admiral? Smiled back. We stop defending, we start attacking. Operation Consequence begins in 12 hours. The officers left the war room with new orders and new purpose. Across the human fleet, preparations began for the largest offensive operation in Earth's history. Ships were armed and fueled. Soldiers checked their weapons. Pilots ran through their attack plans one final time. High Commander was still trying to understand what had gone wrong when the first reports came in. Human ships were moving away from Earth. They were not retreating, they were advancing. They were coming straight for the fleet. For the first time in his long career, did not know what to do. Commander had grown up on a small farm in the mountains of Korea. He had spent his childhood working the land, learning patience and hard work from his parents. He had joined the military because he wanted to protect people, because he believed that the strong had a duty to defend the weak. Now, at 40 years old, he was leading a strike force deep into enemy territory. His task force consisted of 12 destroyers and 4 carriers. Their target was a supply depot called Nexus Station, located in a system that the Dominion had conquered 30 years ago. It was far behind enemy lines, in a place where they felt completely safe. They would not feel safe for much longer. All ships prepare to exit faster than light travel, ordered. Weapons hot on arrival. We hit them hard and fast. Lieutenant, his executive officer, stood beside him on the bridge. She was 28, sharp and efficient, with a talent for keeping calm in crisis situations. She had served under for 3 years, and she trusted him completely. The crew is ready, Commander, she reported. Everyone knows what's at stake. Nodded, let's make this count. The human ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly above Nexus Station. The defenders had approximately 3 seconds to realize what was happening before the first missiles hit their shields. The station was huge, a spinning wheel of metal and crystal that housed thousands of personnel and stored supplies for an entire sector of the Dominion fleet. It was defended by 20 warships, but those ships were not prepared for combat. They were parked in docking bays, their crews enjoying rest time, their weapons powered down. Shatte was brutal and precise. His destroyers focused on the defending ships while his carriers launched fighters to strike the station itself. They tried to respond, tried to organize a defense, but the humans moved too fast. Within 10 minutes, half of the defending fleet was destroyed or disabled. Commander, we're picking up distress signals, reported. They're calling for reinforcements from the main fleet. How long until those reinforcements arrive? 2 hours minimum. Allowed himself a small smile. Then we have 2 hours to finish the job. All ships continue the attack. I want that station neutralized. This same scene was playing out across space. Human strike forces appeared without warning, hitting military targets and then vanishing before the enemy could respond. Supply depots were destroyed. Communication relays were disabled. Patrol ships were ambushed and eliminated. The Dominion, which had spent centuries as the hunter, suddenly found itself being hunted. On the Silence of Worlds, High Commander received report after report of attacks throughout his territory. His officers were panicking, demanding reinforcements that did not exist. His carefully planned conquest of Earth had become a nightmare. This is impossible, he said, staring at the tactical display. How are they doing this? They should be defending there, not attacking us. His tactical advisor looked as frightened as Felt. They are not behaving logically, High Commander. No species has ever responded to invasion by launching offensive operations. It makes no sense. But it made perfect sense to Admiral. She understood something that they did not. Humans had never won wars by playing defense. Every great victory in human history had been won by taking the fight to the enemy, by being more aggressive, more determined, more willing to accept risk. She coordinated the campaign from her command center on Earth, watching the reports come in with grim satisfaction. Nexus Station had been destroyed. 3 patrol groups had been eliminated. A fuel depot in the outer territories was burning. Admiral, we're getting reports from the liberated populations, one of her officers said. The species that the conquered, they're rising up. They're attacking their occupiers. Felt a surge of hope. This was what she had been counting on. The Dominion was built on fear, on the belief that resistance was impossible. Once that belief was broken, the entire empire would start to crumble. Back at Nexus Station, Commander watched the last defender explode in a ball of fire. The station itself was crippled, its weapons destroyed, its power systems failing. But it was still broadcasting a distress signal and knew that reinforcements would be coming soon. All ships prepare to withdraw, he ordered. We've done what we came here to do. Lieutenant nodded, but there was concern in her eyes. Commander, we're picking up life signs on the station. Thousands of them. Not just there are other species there too. Prisoners, probably. Slaves. Felt his heart sink. He had known about the practice of taking slaves from conquered worlds. He had tried not to think about it during the attack. We don't have time to evacuate them, he said quietly. If we stay, we'll be caught by the reinforcements. I know. His voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. But we can broadcast a message. Let them know that help is coming. Let them know they haven't been forgotten. Thought about his childhood on the farm, about the values his parents had taught him. Protect the weak. Help those who cannot help themselves. Never abandon hope. Do it, he said. Send the message. Tell them that Earth remembers them and Earth will return for them. The message went out across all frequencies as the human task force prepared to withdraw. In the ruins of Nexus Station, thousands of slaves from a dozen different species heard words they had never expected to hear. Someone was fighting back. Someone was coming to save them. For the first time in decades, they dared to hope. The human ships jumped to faster-than-light travel moments before the reinforcements arrived. They left behind a destroyed station, a shattered fleet, and a message that would spread across the entire Dominion like wildfire. The humans were coming, and they would not stop until every slave was free. High Commander listened to the reports from Nexus Station and felt his empire beginning to crack. Slave rebellions were breaking out on a dozen worlds. His officers were demoralized and frightened. His supply lines were in chaos, and the human fleet was still out there, still attacking, still refusing to behave like any rational species should. He made his decision. There was only one way to end this. He had to destroy the humans completely, utterly, once and for all. He had to take his entire fleet to Earth and burn that cursed planet to ash. All ships, he commanded, set course for Sol. We end this at the source. The final battle was coming, and humanity was ready. The final battle did not happen at Earth. Admiral refused to let the enemy anywhere near her again. Instead, she gathered the full strength of the Terran Defense Coalition and took the fight to the home system. 80 human warships against the 200 remaining vessels of the Dominion fleet. The odds were against them, but humans had never let bad odds stop them before. There was a pale blue sphere, much like Earth but colder and quieter. It hung in space like a jewel, beautiful and peaceful, completely unaware of the destruction that was about to arrive. High Commander had brought every ship he had left to defend it. This was his final stand. Admiral stood on the bridge of her flagship. the Never Again. The ship had been named for a promise that humanity had made after its last great war, a promise that they would never again allow evil to go unopposed. Now that promise was being tested against an enemy from the stars. "All ships report ready, Admiral," Captain announced. He had transferred to the flagship for the final battle, refusing to miss the end of the war he had helped start. Looked at the tactical display. The fleet was arranged in a defensive formation around their planet. They had the numbers advantage, but their formation was tight, cautious. They were afraid. Good. "High Commander is hailing us," the communications officer reported. "Put him through." His image appeared on the main screen. He looked older than he had in the intelligence reports, tired and beaten down by weeks of defeats. His cold, black eyes had lost their confidence. "Admiral," he said, his voice heavy, "this war has gone far enough. I am prepared to negotiate. The Dominion will withdraw from all human-claimed space. We will pay whatever compensation you require. We will sign treaties guaranteeing permanent peace between our peoples." Listened without expression. Behind her, her officers waited in tense silence. "And what about the 17 species you have enslaved?" she asked. "What about the worlds you have destroyed, the civilizations you have erased? What compensation do they receive?" Hesitated. "That is an internal matter of the Dominion. It does not concern." "It concerns us," interrupted, "because we are not just fighting for Earth. We are fighting for everyone you have ever hurt, every slave in your labor camps, every child who grew up without parents because you killed them, every culture you tried to wipe from existence." She leaned forward, her eyes hard. "Your dominion ends today, not because we want revenge, but because we will not allow what you have done to continue. Surrender now, release all your prisoners, and submit yourself to justice. Or we will come through your fleet and take you ourselves." For a long moment said nothing. Then his image disappeared from the screen. The fleet began to move, forming attack patterns. "I guess that's his answer," Commander said quietly. He had also transferred to the flagship, unable to stay behind while others fought the final battle. Nodded. "All ships attack formation. Let's finish this." The battle began with a storm of missiles and energy beams. The ships were more numerous, but the human vessels were faster and more aggressive. They dove into the enemy formation, creating chaos, refusing to let them use their superior numbers effectively. Captain coordinated the destroyer squadrons, leading them in slashing attacks against the enemy flanks. Lieutenant Commander worked in the tactical center, analyzing enemy communications and identifying weak points in their formation. Commander commanded the carrier group, launching wave after wave of fighters to overwhelm the defenses. An admiral directed it all, moving her ships like pieces on a chessboard, always attacking, always pressing forward. She had studied every battle in human history, every victory won against impossible odds. She knew that wars were not won by the side with the most ships. They were won by the side with the strongest will. The battle raged for 6 hours. Ships on both sides were destroyed, lives were lost, heroes fell. But slowly, inevitably, the formation began to break. Their ships were designed for quick conquests against helpless enemies, not for prolonged combat against an opponent that refused to give up. When the silence of worlds was finally surrounded by human destroyers, High Commander knew it was over. His fleet was shattered. His empire was falling apart. The species he had enslaved were rising up across a dozen systems. Everything he had built was crumbling to dust. Marines from the Never Again boarded his flagship and found him on the command deck, standing alone among the bodies of his officers. He did not resist when they put him in restraints. He did not speak when they led him away. He simply walked, defeated and broken, the last High Commander of the Dominion. In the months that followed, the galaxy was transformed. The 17 conquered species were freed. The slave camps were liberated. Their inhabitants returned to whatever homes they had left. A new galactic council was formed, with representatives from every species that had suffered under rule. Admiral addressed the first meeting of that council, speaking on behalf of humanity. "We did not fight this war because we wanted power," she said, her voice carrying across the great hall. "We fought because we understand something that the never did. We understand that strength is not about conquering others. It is about protecting them." She looked at the assembled delegates, beings of every shape and color, species that had been enemies and slaves, now sitting together as equals. "Our world is called Earth. It is a hard place, a dangerous place, a world that tried to kill us every day for millions of years. It made us strong, it made us stubborn, it made us unable to accept defeat even when defeat seemed certain." She paused, and her expression softened. "But it also taught us something else. It taught us that survival means nothing if you face it alone. On our world, we learned that the only way to overcome impossible challenges is to stand together." She raised her hand, and the delegates fell silent. The Dominion believed that the universe belonged to the strong, that the weak existed only to serve. They were wrong. The universe belongs to everyone, and from this day forward, humanity pledges itself to protecting that truth. If anyone threatens the weak, if anyone tries to build another empire of slavery and fear, they will find us standing in their way. Because we are humans, we come from we do not break, we do not surrender, we do not abandon those who need our help. We are unyielding, and we are here. The council chamber erupted in cheers and applause. Species that had never known hope now saw a future worth fighting for. And at the center of it all stood humanity, no longer alone in the universe, but standing as guardians of a galaxy that finally believed in peace. High Commander was tried and found guilty of crimes against countless species. He spent the rest of his life in a prison cell, watching as everything he had built was dismantled. The people, freed from the lies of their leaders, slowly began to rebuild their society on new principles. And Earth continued to spin around its yellow star, a small blue marble in the vast darkness of space. Its people looked up at the night sky and no longer felt afraid. They knew now that they were not alone, that the universe was full of wonders and dangers beyond imagination. But they also knew something else. They knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them the same way they had always faced challenges. Together, unbroken, unyielding. The end.